Thanks, Phil. Hey, everybody. I'm Ryan. I'm alcoholic. Can everybody hear me? Thumbs up. All right, cool. What a blessing this is, So, like Phil was saying, I got a call. I was at work a couple hours ago, and Ben told me he wasn't feeling well, and he got tested, and he was sick, and he couldn't do it, and he asked me if I would speak. And my first immediate knee-jerk reaction is, "No way! I don't have enough time." Right? Instant fear, right? And I've been sober a little while, and I had that fear. No, I'm not ready. But then I forgot this morning. I prayed. I said, God, guide me, help me, show me the way, help me to be helpful and useful today. And thanks to the disciplines of Alcoholics Anonymous, especially the 10th step, I recognized that fear, and I was able to walk right through it. And here I am tonight. And I just want to say thank you, Phil, for thinking of me as a backup. What a blessing and what an honor to be a backup to Ben R. He's been influential in my sobriety. He's carried me when I couldn't carry myself, and he showed me and helped me get connected to this power I didn't believe in, who's helped me along this path. It's really an honor to be in a Serenity Improvement Group meeting too. This is the meeting I got sober in when I lived in Kingsport. It'll always hold a special place in my heart. It's good to see some old timers, Steven, a couple other guys in here that I haven't seen in a little while. It's cool. And just to hear Steven's voice, it's just, I don't know, it gives me chills. It's cool to be in here, and I feel like family, and I see people from all over the country, and it's awesome. So yeah, a couple disclaimers that Phil so humbly pointed out. I'm wearing a t-shirt. I'm traveling for work. I'm in a hotel room right now, but I've been brought up in Alcoholics Anonymous to represent AA well from the podium or from the Zoom platform. And unfortunately today I'm wearing a t-shirt, but it's an AA t-shirt. So there is that. But anyway, so let me, the big book asked me to share what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. So I will do that the best I can. And I'm going to try to incorporate my experience with the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous throughout my talk. So let me just start with some basic stuff. My sobriety date, September 28th, 2010. And for that, I'm forever grateful. I have a sponsor who has a sponsor. I have a home group. I have commitments in Alcoholics Anonymous. I sponsor guys. I try to stay connected to this thing that's saved my life. Currently, I live in Glasgow, Kentucky. I moved there from work for work about 16 months ago, where I got sober in Kingsport, Tennessee. So let me start off. I'm not going to talk a lot about drinking and a drunk-a-log, but I will identify myself as an alcoholic because I think it's really important, especially for the newcomers. And let me take 1 second. Hats off to the newcomers. Anybody in here with under 6 months sobriety, I just want to say, you're truly a miracle. And it's such a blessing to be able to see Alcoholics Anonymous and God of my understanding in action, because I don't know if I could have gotten sober on a digital platform like this. I just think it's awesome to see AA work. And when this thing happened, AA didn't drag its feet forever. It didn't have a huge meeting. We didn't vote on it. AA just went to Zoom. And it's so cool to watch that evolve. And look what Zoom has opened up for Alcoholics Anonymous as a fellowship. It's so cool to be involved in it, to watch what God can do. But anyway, I grew up in New Jersey. I was born in 1988. Grew up in an alcoholic household. I'm not going to talk about my childhood because, quite frankly, I've worked the steps and it doesn't really matter anymore. But I did grow up in an alcoholic household. Had everything I ever needed, but not everything I wanted. Grew up middle class. Everything was great. But every night, both of my parents drank alcohol alcoholically, and that's just the way I grew up. And I didn't think anything of it. I thought, well, that's what adults do. And from an early age, I wanted to be an adult. I wanted to do that because it looked fun to me, right? And I had a great childhood, man. I did well in school. I did well in sports. I excelled. I have no issues with my childhood. My parents were fantastic, But like you hear in most AA speaker meetings, I had this empty hole inside of me. I had this feeling that I didn't quite belong. I had this feeling of I just had a nervous predisposition, and I didn't quite understand it until I could look back on it. But I always felt out of place. I always felt, unliked. I always felt awkward around people. And I found ways to quiet that inside of me. And it was to excel in academics and excel in sports. I found that if I could excel in these areas of my life, people would like me. And if people liked me, I liked me. And that was the first time in my life that I learned how to kind of be a chameleon, and I would learn how to act around different groups so that I can, get approval. And because I just thrived on this external appreciation and external acceptance to feel good about myself. And, looking back on it now, I mean, it sounds like alcoholism to me, way before I ever found the solution to that problem, which is in a bottle, right? But it sounds like alcoholism, right? Restless, irritable, and discontent. I had that from the beginning. I don't know if I was born with it or what it was, but looking back on it, I had that. I felt that. And I don't remember the first time I got drunk, but I do remember my first drink. And it was on accident. It was, like I told you, my parents are alcoholic, and my dad liked to drink vodka just in a cup on ice. And it was a little dinner party or something, and I thought it was water. It was in a glass, and I was probably 10 years old, and I went up and I just took a big sip of it, and it was just vodka. And I remember distinctly where I was, what it felt like, and I just remember feeling it go all the way down to my toes, and I was just intrigued, amazed, disgusted, all at once. I felt it go all the way down to my stomach, and I was just, my eyes lit up. I didn't puke, I didn't throw up, but I was just like, I had never felt like that. I never felt that experience. I never drank anything that felt like that. And I didn't become a daily drinker at 10 years old. I waited a couple more years at least, but I do distinctly remember that experience. And I don't know if a lot of non-alcoholics remember their first drink, but I definitely do, and the beginning of my story is the same as a lot of people, right? I go into middle school and I want to be popular. I have that feeling of inferiority, right? I don't feel like I belong. I want to be accepted. And I join the sports teams and I start trying to hang out with the older kids. And of course, the older kids comes to alcohol and other substances. And of course, I'll do anything if you like me. So whatever you are doing, I'm going to do, right? And then I found out what the magic was in that drink that my parents were drinking every night, and alcohol fixed all those issues that I had, all those feelings that I was describing, in my childhood. Like most of alcohol fixes that, and it makes me feel okay right here, right now. Makes me feel on top of the world. I can do anything. I can laugh. I can be outgoing. I can talk to girls. I can do whatever. I love the way alcohol makes me feel. I do to this day. I love alcohol because it works for me. It's a wonderful tool. Right. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you my drinking was terrible. I had a blast for, the first 3-4 years of my drinking. I had an absolute blast. If I would trade a lot in my life right now to relive 17, right? It was awesome. I loved it. At the time of my life. Right. But there became a time, and I never quite drank normally ever. Right. I always was the blackout drinker, the throwing up drinker, the guy that was always getting out of hand, never controlled, and I didn't realize it then. Sure, I know what it is now because I've been groomed in Alcoholics Anonymous. I know what the phenomenon of craving is, right? And I understand it now, but back then I didn't understand it. I just thought, well, I don't know what I thought. Once I drank, I didn't stop, and I just thought I was partying, and that's what everybody did. But the longer I kept drinking like that, the more I realized that my drinking is not normal. But I didn't care because it was still working for me, right? I wasn't having the consequences. Alcohol made me feel wonderful. I said, I want to do this as much as I can. And quite frankly, I did, and I went to my first treatment center when I was 16 years old. I got caught smoking pot outside of high school, and as part of their program to let me back in school, I had to go to an outpatient treatment center. And that's the first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous I ever went to, 16 years old. I don't really remember what the topic was. I don't remember much about it. I do remember where the church was. It was in New Jersey where I grew up. But there is one thing I distinctly remember is after the meeting, an older gentleman came up to me and he had this blue book in his hand. And I was like, what is this? I don't know what to do. And he gave me the book. And he's like, kid, whatever you do, don't throw this book away. And he walked away. And I was just like, okay, cool. And I had no intentions of getting sober there. But I never threw that book away. And ultimately fast forward all the way down, that's the book I ended up getting sober with. That's a big book I still have now because I listened to that gentleman. He helped me when no one could. He knew I wasn't ready. I was so young. I wasn't ready to get sober, but he gave me the book and said, don't throw it out. And I didn't throw it out just because he told me not to. And I ended up, I remember distinctly just, resting my glass on it in my room. This is phony, Alcoholics Anonymous, whatever, but I never threw it out. And that's the book that's underlined, marked up, and it holds a 10-year medallion on the front of it now. And it's truly a blessing. That man will never know what he did for me, right? And that was my first exposure to AA, and of course I didn't get sober when I was 16. I kept going. And like I said, 17, was fantastic. I went back to treatment again at 18. This was when my drinking got really bad. I stayed drunk 18 to 21 years old every day. I had an enabling father who purchased me alcohol because he was alcoholic, and that was his way to bond with me. I don't resent him for it. That was the best he could do at that time. You know, he wanted to be with me, and that's the only way that he could figure out how to spend time with me and bond with me, and we drank together. But around 18, I was suffering from this terrible anxiety and depression. I started to become a daily drinker at 18. I'm starting to lose jobs. I'm starting to get caught drinking at work, losing jobs, you know, waking up in the morning, puking in the morning, hands shaking, starting to drink morning drinks. And my life is starting to turn, you know, and I'm starting to realize like this is not fun anymore. I'm not having fun. I can't stop. And I tried to do the different things that we read about in the text. And I tried to just drink beer and just smoke weed and just drink on the weekends and not drink in the mornings and not drink at work. And of course, I tried all those things because that was my way of working the first step, right? I'm trying to figure out how I can manage this thing because of the way it made me feel when it was working, right? I was still trying to grasp that feeling because alcohol worked for me so well, right? And I wanted it. I didn't want to give it up. It's a beautiful thing for me. It's like the key in the lock for me. It just unlocks me to the world, and I feel like I'm a part of everything. I feel wonderful, and I'm sure alcoholics in this room know what that feeling is. And I didn't want to give it up, right? So I started getting real depressed, and I got suicidal at 18 years old, and I didn't know what was wrong with me. I didn't even know I was an alcoholic. I knew I drank too much. I knew I had, you know, some other issues going on, and I remember distinctly, you know, holding a gun to my head, and I didn't want to die, but I didn't want to keep living, and I didn't know what was going on. My life was a disaster, and it wasn't falling apart so much on the outside, right? It was the internal. The four horsemen is described in our text, and the first time I read that when I was 21 years old and I walked into AA and someone told me what the four horsemen were, I said, wow, I lived that for 3 years. I lived it every single day. I understand what the four horsemen are. And the four horsemen are a low spot to be in. I think every alcoholic that gets sober in Alcoholics Anonymous experiences the four horsemen before they actually get sober. And I certainly did, you know, and I didn't want to live anymore. And I went to treatment again at 18. It was an outpatient treatment facility, and I just stayed for a couple days and left. And, you know, 18 to 21, I'm not going to talk more about my drinking. Same thing on repeat. You know, just drinking every day, just reckless, trying to scrape by, trying to manage my life, you know, the best I could, trying to go to college. And then I ended up, you know, I was 21 years old. I got fired from a job. I got arrested for public intoxication, possession of marijuana, and a good girlfriend that I had, you know, broke up with me all in a 2-week span. And that was kind of the wake up call. Like, hey, you're 21 years old. Your life's falling apart. You just got arrested. These things are happening to you. It's like, I had enough of it. And I said, you know what, I'm going to go to an inpatient treatment facility. So I went to inpatient rehab in New Jersey. I got out. And the day I got out, I moved to Kingsport, Tennessee. I have a wonderful grandmother who got sober originally in this program, and she told me that I could come and live with her. So the day I got out, I got in I had a little Ford Explorer at the time, and I didn't know what I was doing. And I could not stay in New Jersey. I had to leave. I had to get away from get away from all that old stuff. And I said, I'm going to Tennessee. My mom set it up. My grandma said I can live with her. So I drove to Tennessee. Right. And I went up in Kingsport, Tennessee. I've never been to Kingsport. I don't know what's going on. And she said, you know, she hugged me and she said, you know, you can stay with me as long as you want. The only stipulation is that you go to AA. I said, well, all right, cool. I'll do that deal. I'll do that deal every day. Right. So I'm living at my grandma's, 21 years old, fresh out of treatment, you know, just how I thought my life was going to look, right? And I wind up going to Serenity Improvement Group at 12 o'clock one afternoon, right? Because it was the closest meeting, and she told me to go there. That's where she went. So I went. And I distinctly remember the faces as I walked in. You know, I was so scared. I was scared to death. I didn't know what to expect. You know, I was afraid. And I'm newly sober, and I want to drink, and I don't want to drink, and I walk into AA, and I distinctly remember looking over to the right, and I see this sign, this circle and triangle, and it says "Welcome Home." And I'm just like, all right, I can deal with that. I can do this, I think, you know. And I walked in, and I sat around the side of the group. I didn't talk to anybody, and people kept coming up to me and saying, you know, welcome, I'm so-and-so. Glad you're here. Coffee's over there. They made me feel okay. They made me feel comfortable. Didn't make me feel awkward. And I don't know what they talked about. I don't know what the topic was. but everybody talked to me. A lot of people came up to me after the meeting and talked to me, and I didn't know what they were doing. I didn't know what they wanted from me. I don't know what AA is, but Serenity Improvement Group showed me what AA was before you told me what it was, and I'll be forever grateful for that. And I distinctly remember an older gentleman coming up to me after the meeting, and he said, "Kid, we'll love you until you can love yourself." And I said, okay. I said, I'm in on AA. I'm going to do this. I'm going to try. I'm going to do whatever they say. But, I kept drinking, kept going back and testing the waters. I'd get 20 days, drink, get a month, 2 months, drink, and then finally, I had another spiraling event. I'm not going to go into all the details, but whatever. I come back into AA and I'm ready and I get sober, right? I get a sponsor, right? Ben R. I get Ben R. because he's just going on one day about AA and recovery and the steps, and he is just on fire. You guys, I don't know if anyone in here has heard Ben R. I'm sure you have, but he was just on fire. I thought he was drunk at first because he was so energetic. He was crying, fired up, laughing, talking about God and the steps, and I'm like, I don't know, man. This guy's crazy, but he's young and he's fired up. I'm going to ask him to sponsor me, right? And I'm so thankful I did, man. I'm so thankful. And, he got me going, and the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous was like a lifeboat. It carried me until I could get connected through the steps to this power greater than myself. I clung on to the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous very hard. I would go to 2 meetings a day. I would go to the Waffle House after meetings. Quite frankly, because I'm 21 years old, I have no job and I'm living at my grandma's. I have nothing else to do. So I'm like, well, let me just keep going to these meetings, right? And they took me in, right? And I remember early on in my recovery, some of the younger people took me to a Tiki Pa, right? Conference of Young People in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'm 3 months sober, right? And I go to this young people's conference and I'm scared. I don't know what to do. And I just go with them. I get a hotel room and I go with them. And I experienced what the AA fellowship was, and I saw it in action. And it was just young people, 500 young people just having a party, a whole weekend party, just yelling, screaming. You guys know what the young people do, right? It's so cool. And I was 21 years old and I thought my life was over when I walked into the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous. But Tiki Pa showed me that I can be young and be sober and be happy, right? And that sealed the deal for me. I said, I love this. I felt so good, and slowly I was starting to feel a part of, just like alcohol does for me quickly, right? Who says that? Clancy used to say that, right? Alcohol does for me, or AA does for me slowly what alcohol does for me quickly, right? And that's exactly what I was feeling when I was at Tiki Pa. I felt a part of, I felt okay. I was having fun. I felt good, right? I felt good. And naturally I wanted more. So I got involved in AA. I started chairing meetings. I started doing whatever you guys told me to do, because like anything else in my life, just like today, if something makes me feel good or feel nothing at all, right, sign me up. I can't get enough, right? And AA made me feel good. The Fellowship of AA made me feel good. And it still does today. I love how AA makes me feel, right? And so I'm involved in the fellowship. I'm working the steps with my sponsor, right? We're going through the deal, and I don't know what, the steps are cool, because the longer I stay sober, my opinion and my experience with the steps obviously changes, right? The first time when I'm 3 months sober, I go through the steps just at such a quick pace. I don't even know what's going on, but I'm so thankful that when we started going through the steps, he didn't let me slack. He said, let's meet regularly. We're going to meet face to face. We're going to go through the steps out of the big book, and I'm going to show you how to do it. And I said, okay. And he stuck to that word, and he showed me how to work the steps out of the book. And that was so pivotal for me, because I was intimidated by the steps. Number one, because I don't understand them. Number two, because I don't believe in God, right? I don't believe in God. I wasn't raised in a religious household. I never had God in my life. I never went to church, and I thought God was my grandma's God, and I wasn't really into that. It was contempt prior to investigation, looking back on it, right? But I didn't want to hear that, right? But I said, okay, because I was so beat down by alcohol that I was beaten to a sense of reasonableness. Like I was willing to do it because I did not want to go back, right? I didn't want to go back to that misery of active alcoholism. So the first step, I'm so thankful today that Ben explained to me what alcoholism is. Right. He explained to me we read through the first 50 something pages of the book, and he explained to me the doctor's opinion. He explained to me the phenomenon of craving. That only happens when I drink alcohol, right? Once I take one drink of alcohol, all bets are off. I'm not going to stop until I'm blacked out or physically removed from the situation via an institution or treatment center, right? Or jail, right? That's the only way I'm going to stop. And that has been confirmed by my experience time and time again. That happens every single time I drink. And he pointed that out in the book, and we talked about it. And then he showed me about where it talks about the mental obsession, right? The mental obsession. So essentially, I'm powerless over alcohol when I put it in my body and when I don't put it in my body, right? How powerless is that? That's the definition of powerless right there. I can't drink. I have a body that can't drink and a mind that can't not drink, right? The mental obsession. When I'm not drinking, all I'm doing is thinking about how I can get it, how I can hide it, how I can scheme, how I can figure it out, how I can just drink successfully, how I can try again, right? Right? The problem centers here, but he taught me that recovery centers in my feet, meaning I have to do the work, right? But then here's the kicker. That doesn't make me alcoholic, right? The physical allergy and the mental obsession don't make me alcoholic, right? The spiritual malady is what makes me thirsty, right? And that's what I was describing as a kid. That feeling of, it's on page 52, right? The bedevilments, right? That's the spiritual malady for me, right? I can't make a living. I can't, trouble with personal relationships, right? Depression, fear, misery, depression, right? That's me. That's how I feel sober. And I think you guys can understand and relate to that. That's how I feel sober without a spiritual solution. So therefore, I turn to spirits to quiet that feeling, right? There's a reason they call alcohol, liquor, spirits, right? Because it does the same thing as a spiritual experience. For me, I'm sure a lot of people can nod their head to that, right? And he explained to me that, and I didn't know. I'd been to treatment 3 times, and they didn't explain to me what alcoholism was. They told me I just drank too much, and they wanted to talk about my childhood, and they wanted to talk about all this stuff, and they did a great job. I'm not knocking treatment centers. I've been to treatment, and it helped me a lot, but it didn't. It was run by people who weren't alcoholic, and my sponsor is a diehard alcoholic, and he showed me what alcoholism was. He said, you'll never understand the solution if you don't know what the problem is. And that rings true to me today. I had to understand what the problem was. And once I understood what the problem was, is when we started going forward to a solution. And I didn't believe in God, and I didn't, like I said, 2 and 3 came up, and we talked about it, and he essentially showed me how I failed running my life, right? We went over my history, and we went over my attempts at running my life, and he said, are you willing to have a new director? Are you willing to have somebody else run your life? And of course I said yes, because I would do anything my sponsor tells me to do, but really, I was only willing to turn my will and life over to my sponsor and my AA group. I still didn't quite believe in God. And I think that rings true for a lot of people in AA. They don't believe in God when they do the 3rd step, right? But as a result of the steps, I can look back and say that God's here, and now I have a wonderful relationship with God. But at the time when I did the 3rd step, I wasn't saying, okay, God, I'm ready to have you. I said, okay, God, I'm willing and ready to do the rest of the work so that maybe I can meet you, right? So I turned my will and my life over to my higher power, which was my home group, basically. And Ben, and he had me praying, he had me praying, even though I didn't believe in God. He had me praying on my knees from the beginning. And like I said, if anybody's struggling in here, that's something that really helped me in the beginning is I got a good sponsor, and I did everything he told me to do, because I was, quite frankly, out of good ideas. I was out of good ideas. And I was willing to take direction from him. And then maybe I had like 4 or 5 months sober, and he sat me down. He said, we're going to do the 4th step. And I said, whoa, hold on. I don't know. This is kind of going too quick here. And he explained to me, he said, you're in between solutions right now, right? Your old solution clearly didn't work, and you're not quite fully invested, and you don't quite fully comprehend this new solution. So you're basically treading water in between. And when he said that, and he explained the reason why we needed to go through the work quickly so that I can clean out the garbage and get connected to this power greater than myself, it made sense to me. And he kind of tricked me into doing the 4th step, right? And so we did it, right? And he showed me how to do it out of the book, right? Do 4-column inventory, do fear inventory, do a conduct inventory, sex inventory. And then he also asked me to write down my secrets, right? And that's not really in the book in the inventory, but he had me do it. And I'm so thankful he did, because he wanted me to disclose all my secrets that I was holding. He wanted me to talk about them with him. And I'm thankful he did it. And I do that with the guys that I sponsor too. It's been such a freeing experience for a lot of men that I've sponsored. And then of course we do the fifth step, right? We go right along. We're not stopping. And I didn't quite understand it at the time. And I can relate to the new guys that I sponsor who are really apprehensive about going quick, right? They don't want to do it. And I was the same way, but he set the pace. He was willing to call me and meet with me and set the dates and set the pace. And he brought me through quick. And I did the fifth step at my grandma's house still, still no job, still living at grandma's, 21 years old, maybe 6 months sober, right? But I'm doing the fifth step and I'm starting to feel okay. I'm starting to feel this weight that I've been carrying fall off my shoulders. And the fifth step promises start coming true in my life and I start to feel okay, right? And slowly but surely, this thing starts working and I start feeling something. I can look back on it now and say it's the spiritual connection and my higher power working in my life, but I didn't know what it was then, but I started feeling okay. And then 6 and 7 is where God does his work, right? 6 and 7 is where God does his work. I can't work on my character defects, just like I can't stop drinking on my own, right? I can't do it, but through inventory and continually looking for character defects, I know what to turn over to God. And I believe that God takes my character defects from me when they block me from being useful to others, right? I can't stop my character defects. I wish I could, and I hear a lot of people say they're working on their character defects, and that hasn't been the case for me. That hasn't been my story. I can't. I have learned that I can try to practice the opposite, right? Learn what the opposite of my character defects is and strive for that. But quite frankly, I can't stop my character defects. That's been my experience. But I have to do my job in constantly looking for new character defects, and they come up at my place of employment. They come up in personal relationships. They come up in AA. They come up with the way I treat the people that I love. And if I'm diligent with inventory, then I will be able to see the truth and I'll be able to see my character defects. And then I go to God with them. 6 and 7 are not that complicated, but what's the 12 and 12 say? Separates the men from the boys, because I want to just glaze over it because it's 2 paragraphs in the book, right? But for me, the more I stay diligent on 6 and 7, the more stuff I have to turn over to God, right? And he does the work there, not me. So let's keep going. That's what Ben says. Let's go. Let's make amends. Let's start cleaning this garbage up that you've caused, right? And he showed me the tornado story, right, in the big book. Ma, Annie Grand, the wind quit blowing. He said, yeah, the wind quit blowing, but we have a lot of stuff to fix. We have a lot to repair. And he had me write an inventory. And that's exactly what the 8th step is an inventory. There's a lot of inventory in Alcoholics Anonymous. That's what I found out. And I write a little list and I write how I harmed him and I start going out and making amends. And there's a couple of amends I just want to touch on quickly. I think I'm still good. Yeah, I'm good on time. Good. One is my father. I was able to make amends to my father, both financially and emotionally. And if anybody's in here sitting on amends, I hope this story kind of motivates you, because I didn't want to make the amends, and my father and I's relationship wasn't the best, and I didn't want to do it, but I'm so thankful that I did, and I sent him the money that I stole from him, and I met with him, and I discussed, how I had harmed him and where I could have been a better son. And I asked him, I did exactly what it says in the book, look, how can I make this right, Dad? I want to build our relationship back to what it should be, and I want to do what I can to make it right. And, he hugged me and he was still drunk, but he was such a good father. And he just told me he was proud that I finally found a way out, and he ended up dying in 2015. He drank himself to death. And it's sad, but you know what? I am at peace with that. I was able to clean up that wreckage, and I was able to clean that up with him. And I'm thankful for that. And I'm at peace with that. And he always told me, no matter how much he was drinking, he always told me that he was proud of me for quitting drinking and getting sober. He always did. He was so proud of me. And that's the one that I'm really thankful that I made early in sobriety. I only had maybe 9 months, and I went and I pocketed my pride and I went at it and I made the amends, and I'm thankful I did, because he ended up passing away. So yeah, 8 and 9, 8 and 9 are awesome. 8 and 9 are where the magic happens. Really, the 9th step promises come true when I'm halfway through making amends, right? And For me, the amends weren't that hard because I was 21 years old. I didn't have a 40-year drinking history of all these, I had amends to make, but it wasn't a lot, and I did them. But making amends in sobriety is a different story, right? That's a humbling experience, making amends in sobriety. And that's where, the 10th step comes in, 9th step is when I make amends for the past things I've done. And the 10th step is where I start making amends for the things that I do right now, right here. And that's where most of my experience comes now is in the 10th step. 10, 11, and 12, the longer I stay sober, the more influential and the more they mean to me, right? I hear people call 10, 11, and 12 the maintenance steps, but quite frankly, I think that drastically sells them short. I try to live in 10, 11, and 12 today because those are the disciplines of Alcoholics Anonymous that help me to stay close to this power that absolutely saved my life, right? 1 through 9, they're an experience, and they give me some ammunition, and that's how I can develop a message that carries depth and weight so that I can actually be effective in the 12th step, right? I have to go through the experience of 1 through 9 to actually have a message to carry, right? But 10, 11, and 12, the longer I stay sober and the more I diligently practice them, they're game changers. And especially during the pandemic, right? Like if I didn't have 10, 11, and 12, I don't know what I would do. I'd go absolutely nuts. I can't handle it. I couldn't do it. Right? 10 is essentially, Bill Wilson is asking me to essentially take inventory all day long, right? That's what he's doing. Constantly look for, the same things that we looked at in step 4 throughout the day, right? And make amends quickly if we harmed anyone. And he gives us a recipe for making that amends. He tells me exactly what I need to do when I harm somebody, when I'm wrong. And not if I'm wrong. He tells me I'm going to make mistakes. And Bill Wilson made plenty of mistakes in his recovery, but I'm so thankful that he left us with this step. It's really a recipe for me to stay unblocked from God. And do I practice a 10-step perfectly? No. When I get busy, when I get overwhelmed, my knee-jerk reaction is to exert more Ryan into the situation. Yeah. More self-will will fix this. I need to do more. I need to work harder. I need to make more money. That's my knee-jerk reaction when things get tough. But thankfully, through repetition and through the disciplines of step 10, I've been able to take a step back and really look for the things that are taught that Bill Wilson is talking about in the 10th step throughout my day, every single day, right? And 10 and 11 are joined at the hip, right? 11 is my nightly review, which is more inventory, right? So my nightly review is an inventory of how well I did doing inventory throughout the day. Right? There's a lot of inventory in AA, and Bill Wilson talks about meditation, right? And he doesn't really elaborate too much in the big book. What did he have, 4 years sober? I don't know if he was too much of a guru on meditation, but he elaborates a lot in the 12 and 12 about meditation, and he says that the world's libraries are full of resources, right? And I think the 11-step journey is such an individualized journey in Alcoholics Anonymous for each separate person. And my meditation life when I was 6 months sober was essentially non-existent, right? And now when I have 10 years sober, meditation is one of the most important disciplines in my life. Because it tells me that I sought through prayer and meditation to improve my conscious contact with God, right? When I was a year, 2 years sober, I thought it said sought through chairing meetings, sought through being GSR, sought through going to the treatment center and talking to the guys, sought through sponsoring. I thought those things were going to get me closer to God, right? But the step is crystal clear. There's one way to get closer to God, prayer and meditation. Right. And I was so confused. I thought if I could do more in AA and be Mr. AA, God would reward me and I would be closer to God. But I was so far from the truth. But I had to go through that in my experience to realize how important prayer and meditation really are. And as I stay sober, I start looking into different avenues of meditation. And it's really been a cool journey. It's fun. I enjoy meditation. And if anybody's stuck in here on meditation and doesn't quite get it, I'm with you. I was there. I thought meditation it took me a year before I even really tried to close my mind down and really experience right here, right now, right? Because that's what meditation does. Meditation's about living right here, right now. Because everybody on here, right now, has everything they've ever needed, everything they've ever wanted. Right here, this second, we're all sober. We're in here on a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. Life's wonderful, right? But the problems arise when I start thinking about the future and dwelling on the past. And meditation helps me stay right here, right now, because that's all life really is anyway, right here, right now. And it's only through practicing meditation that I've been able to truly reap the benefits of it. And I know when my sponsees say, I don't want to meditate, I don't know how to, it's weird, I can't quiet my mind, but I just say, keep practicing, keep trying. And that's what you guys told me, right? You told me to keep trying, keep practicing. But it says that meditation is non-debatable, right? So for me, meditation has been really important. And what I've been doing recently, the last couple of weeks, and I've done this at different points in my sobriety, but I write my nightly review, write it down in a note in my phone, and I send it to a few guys, right, to be accountable, right, to be involved, to do the nightly review. I didn't always do the nightly review every night, right? And I used to go through and just get on my knees and, quick, where was I resentful, selfish, or frustrated, do I owe amends? No. And I would get in bed and go to bed, right? After watching Netflix for 2 hours, but I'm too busy to do a nightly review, right? But thankfully, my sponsor actually had encouraged me to get back into actually writing it out and sending it to others and being accountable. And I've been doing that, and I really enjoy it. It makes me closer to my brothers in recovery. It keeps me accountable, and it's just really it's helpful. It's a way for me to get rid of the garbage at the end of the day, right? This is how I look at it. Like the fourth step is like a spring cleaning, right? You do it maybe once a year, right? But 10 and 11 are like taking out the trash. How many times a week you take out the trash in your house, right? You take them out a couple times a week, right? That's how the frequency I see of 10, 11 is getting rid of that trash that builds up, so that I don't have to do as many fourth step inventories, right? If I'm diligent in 10, 11, I don't have to keep doing these drawn out fourth steps, right? I can keep the amount of garbage that is in between me and God at a minimum, and I can stay connected, right? I can stay in the sunlight of the Spirit. But that's only through practicing the disciplines of 10 and 11. And I've only realized how important 10 and 11 are when I got away from practicing them, right? Because I don't know about you guys, but I go through points in my sobriety where meditation is not that important to me. I'm busy. I'm in school. I'm working. I have a girlfriend. I need to go on more trips. That's what I'm thinking. And I'm thinking that I need to fix this internal spiritual maladjustment. I need to fill this God-sized hole inside of me with more money, more work, more women, more travel, more trips, everything but a spiritual solution, right? And I don't know about you guys, but I've tried. I've been through that, and it doesn't work for me. Those external things leave me with a feeling of euphoria, followed by a sudden feeling of emptiness, and then I need more, right? And that's been my experience, and the more I stay sober, the longer I stay sober, the more I realize that it's not about attaining things. It's about losing things. It's about subtraction, right? This whole program is a program of ego deflation. Ego is my number one problem, right? It stands for edging God out. That's my specialty, edging God out. No matter how long I stay sober, no matter how long I stay spiritually connected, living a spiritual life, I still have a tendency to want to run my life, right? But I'm so thankful that there's a lot of guys in Alcoholics Anonymous who are big on 10, 11, and 12, and who have encouraged me to stay in the disciplines of 10, 11, and 12. And let me just talk about step 12 a little bit, and then I'll tell you what it's like now. Step 12, it's been a game changer for me. It's especially during COVID, right? Can't go to meetings, but I've still been sponsoring guys. I've been picking up some guys, even on Zoom meetings. They call me and they want to work, and I've been doing Zoom meetings with guys. But ever since I got sober, Ben made me sponsor guys, right? He didn't say it's an option. He said you have to sponsor guys. He says I sponsor guys who sponsor guys, and I think for anybody. If anybody's been through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, has had a spiritual awakening, and has been relieved of the obsession to drink alcohol, you can't not sponsor somebody. I think just sponsoring people and bringing them through the work is an example of the gratitude that I feel from having been transformed through the process of the steps and meeting this God that I never believed in to begin with, right? Right. And now in my process of the steps, I'm on step 12, right? And I'm maybe a year sober, and I can look back and I can say, wow, I believe in God, and God's the number one most important thing in my life, right? How did that happen, right? I don't know how it happened. I was transformed through the steps. And when I say God, I mean your interpretation of God. That's the coolest thing about AA. They didn't shove a religious God down my throat, because if they did, I would have left. They left it open. They left the hoop open wide enough for me to jump through it. And I'm so thankful for that. I think Bill Wilson in the first 100 really realized that if you're gonna if we were too rigid on the God idea, it's going to turn people away. And I'm thankful that they left the door to spirituality open for me to get in, and the practicing these principles in all our affairs. A lot of people, and me included, I just want to think of the 12th step as sponsoring guys, right? Working with others, because that's fun. That's the cool part about the 12th step. Watching somebody recover, watching somebody get their wife and their family and their children, their job back, buying a house. It's the coolest thing to watch a guy hold their hand, take them through this spiritual journey, and watch them get their life back. That's the coolest thing in Alcoholics Anonymous. I wouldn't want anybody to miss it. So that's what I think of when I think of the 12 steps. But what about practicing these principles in all my affairs? Do I do that, right? And I have to be honest with myself, and I have to look at myself. It can be another little inventory there. Am I practicing the principles of Alcoholics Anonymous in all of my affairs? Or am I coming into a meeting once every, a couple times a week, sharing a good share out of the memorized information that I have out of the 12 and 12 or the big book, and signing off and saying, I'm doing good in AA. Good job, right? You can quote the big book. I've done that. I've been Mr. AA, and I feel I've been a fake AA member where I come on meetings and I share, egocentric shares about the steps and about, all this stuff to make myself look good and make myself look like an AA guru, right? And but I'm not living the life, right? And Ben has been big, lately about transitioning from an information-based recovery to an experiential-based recovery, because I've been the man that wanted to just know more information. Let me get, more information, more spiritual literature, more. But then lately he's been talking more about using that instead of having the knowledge, have the experience, right? And that I'm really thankful that I've been trying to go in that direction, because it's really been helping me overall in every area of my life. And let me tell you what my life's like now. So I remember I was 21 years old, living at my grandma's house, working at Bojangles. I don't know. I see some Northerners up there. Bojangles is like a little fried chicken place. We have them down south. It's like KFC kind of. I was working drive-through at Bojangles, right? 21 years old. And, and gradually, as I'm working the steps, I get a little more ambitious, right? I get my drive back, and I start waiting tables at a restaurant. I move out of my grandma's house and get a little apartment, right? And I decide I want to go back to college, and I become a nurse, right? So I become a nurse, right? Cool. My mom's a nurse. She always inspired me to do big things, and she kind of pushed me towards healthcare. And so I became a nurse, right? And then I bought a house, and I went to graduate school, and and I don't want to make this part of my story sound like a list of my achievements, because that's not what it is. But my job in Alcoholics Anonymous is to tell you what my life is like now, because you already know. Remember I was telling you I wanted to shoot myself because I was so depressed and couldn't stop drinking? I think it's important for the newcomer to hear what my life's like today, because my life is awesome, and it's hard, and I work in healthcare, and we're getting crushed right now, right? I took care of a bunch of COVID patients today. I'm a nurse practitioner now, and my life's awesome, But here's the coolest thing about what my life's like right now, right? That I have a purpose. I have a purpose. I have a primary purpose, which has been given to me through the 12 steps in the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. My primary purpose is to stay sober and help another alcoholic achieve sobriety. No matter what's going on in my life, no matter, what my life looks like from an achievement standpoint, and I didn't do these things. I just suited up, showed up, put one foot in front of the other, trusted God, and did the next right thing. And these are the blessings in my life, right? This is what my life looks like. And I can't take a lot of credit for it. But no matter what is going on in my life, as long as I adhere to my primary purpose and keep Alcoholics Anonymous and a relationship with God number one in my life, I can't fail, And And I don't ever want to forget what my primary purpose is, because before I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, I had no purpose. I was just a shell of a person roaming the streets of this world trying to survive, right? I had no soul. I lost my soul. I was nobody. I was lost. But I came in here and I did what you told me to do, got connected to this spiritual power, and I have a primary purpose today. And I'm so grateful for that. I'm so grateful for Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, AA is not my whole life, but it makes my life whole. It gives me purpose. You know, I can use the miserable, terrible experiences of my active alcoholism, and I can use them to gain the confidence of somebody new. And I can use that experience to help him relate to me. And I can use my experience with the steps to guide the new man towards the sunlight. And there's nothing greater than that in my life. That is the number one most important thing in my life. And I hope I never stray from that, because Alcoholics Anonymous has saved my life. And I owe everybody in here, you know, a debt of gratitude for that, because you guys were here when I got here. You guys put your arm around me, said, kid, we'll love you till you can love yourself. You guys showed me what AA was. You didn't tell me. And for that, I'm grateful. And I'm Ryan. I'm an alcoholic. Thanks.
Thank you, Ryan.